Hey everyone, Will here. So for today's video, we are going to be analyzing the fourth presidential election in American history. That means we're going to be going over all aspects of this race, including the context of the race, the candidates in the race, and the results of the race. So without further ado, let's begin. So the fourth presidential election in American history took place from October 31st, 1800 to December 3rd, 1800, spanning over the course of 33 consecutive days. Similar to the previous two presidential elections in American history, the telegraph was still not invented yet, which made it very difficult to transmit information across the country effectively. So the fourth presidential election in American history was the first presidential election in which an incumbent president lost re-election, that president being John Adams. This election also signified a major political realignment in the United States that ushered in a Democratic-Republican revolution. In this revolution, Democratic Republicans established themselves as the biggest political party in the U.S., holding the presidency for 24 consecutive years. The Democratic-Republican Revolution was the result of a backlash to three major events that happened back-to-back during the Adams administration. These events were the XYZ affair, the Quasi War, and the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts. So the XYZ affair was a failed diplomatic effort made between the US and France in 1797. In this diplomatic attempt, US President John Adams sent 3 ministers to France in July of 1797 to negotiate a trade agreement in hopes of stopping France's blockade on US trade with Great Britain. The 3 ministers selected for this assignment were Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, John Marshall, and Elbridge Gerry. These 3 diplomats were sent to make negotiations with French Foreign Minister Charles Maurice de Talleyrand Périgord. However, when they arrived to make the negotiations, Talleyrand left the American diplomats to negotiate with 3 French officials. These French officials were Jean Hottinger, Pierre Bellamy, and Lucien Hauteville. These officials later became known as X, Y, and Z. The American diplomats were quickly shocked when the French officials requested that a massive bribe of 1,200,000 ivories, equivalent to $250,000 today, be given to France Foreign Minister Talleyrand. Additionally, the French officials requested that a massive loan, equivalent to $10 million today, be paid to France. Finally, they demanded that President Adams apologize for all anti-French sentiments he had expressed in recent years. The French officials stated that they would not engage in any negotiations until these demands were met. Refusing to entertain any notions of corruption, bribery, or apologies, the 3 diplomats returned to the United States in the spring of 1798. The outcome of this meeting made President Adams publicly wary of France. President Adams declared his wariness of the French to the public when he called attempted negotiations an absolute failure. Many Democratic Republicans believed that President Adams was hiding positive developments from the public. They believed that John Adams was anti-French and that he was exaggerating the failings of diplomatic efforts with the French officials. President Adams attempted to rebuke this assertion by releasing full documents of the proceedings to the public. In the released documents, President Adams hid the French officials' names under the guises of X, Y, and Z. When news of the attempted bribery and solicitation reached the American public, there was public outcry against the French. President Adams used this outcry to prepare for a possible war with France by pushing Congress to increase military spending. Congress subsequently created the Department of the Navy. In July of 1798, the U.S. Congress authorized U.S. ships to attack French vessels. This declaration angered many Democratic Republicans who wanted a reduction of the U.S. military budget. This action also led to the start of an undeclared naval war between the U.S. and France that would later become known as the Quasi-War. So the Quasi-War took place between 1798 and 1800. It consisted of a series of minor conflicts between the U.S. and France. During these conflicts, President John Adams briefly reinstalled former President George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. military. The naval conflicts in the Quasi-War took place predominantly in the Atlantic and Caribbean Oceans. During the Quasi-War, U.S. Vice President Thomas Jefferson published a series of writings criticizing President Adams' decision to engage in an undeclared war with France. This led prominent Federalist Alexander Hamilton to publish his own piece in the Gazette of the United States, criticizing the Democratic Republicans for being more Frenchmen than American. As tensions grew, many Federalists in Congress attempted to quash pro-French sentiments in the U.S. by passing the Alien and Sedition Acts. The Alien and Sedition Acts were 4 laws passed in June and July of 1798. These laws were the Naturalization Act, the Alien Act, the Alien Enemies Act, and the Sedition Act. The Naturalization Act changed the residency requirement to become a U.S. citizen and vote from 5 years to 14 years. Federalists argued that this law kept foreign influences out of U.S. government operations, while Democratic Republicans argued that this law grossly intended to remove immigrant influence from the voting process. The Alien Act was passed 7 days after the Naturalization Act. This law authorized President Adams to deport any resident of the U.S. that was considered a danger to the safety and peace of the United States. Federalists argued that this law kept the American populace safe from outside threats, while Democratic Republicans argued that this law gave the president complete authority to deport any U.S. citizen. Democratic Republicans also saw this law as an assault on immigrant rights in the United States. The Alien Enemies Act gave President Adams even more deportation authority. The Alien Enemies Act authorized the president to remove all immigrants from a foreign nation if the nation they originated from was at war with the United States. Federalists argued that this law protected the U.S. government from foreign spies, while Democratic Republicans argued that this law would allow the government to wrongfully deport Americans simply on the basis of the country from which they originated. The Sedition Act was the final act passed under the Alien and Sedition Acts. This law directly contradicted the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution by making it illegal to protest against the Quasi-War and the 3 alien laws passed by Congress. Federalists argued that this law was necessary to crack down on riots and insurrections, while Democratic Republicans argued that this law was unconstitutional and fundamentally immoral in its nature. The passage of these 4 laws backfired enormously on President John Adams. It also led Alexander Hamilton, a previous critic of anti-French rhetoric, to publicly denounce the Adams administration's actions as tyrannical. The backlash from the Alien and Sedition Acts in particular was a contributing factor to President John Adams' downfall in the 1800 election and Vice President Thomas Jefferson's rise in the election. As with the previous 2 presidential elections, the original Electoral College allowed each elector allotted by a state to vote for 2 candidates for president. The candidate with the most electoral votes would be elected president, while the candidate with the second most electoral votes would be elected vice president. In this election, both the Federalists and Democratic Republicans chose one candidate as their presidential contender and one candidate as their vice presidential contender. Additionally, John Jay chose to run for president as a Federalist, although his candidacy was virtually unrecognized by the Federalist Party. The Federalists pledged their support behind John Adams of Massachusetts for president, and Charles Cotesworth Pinckney of South Carolina for vice president. On the other hand, the Democratic Republicans pledged their support behind Thomas Jefferson of Virginia for president and Aaron Burr of New York for vice president. Now, although the candidates themselves were a major factor in this race, the biggest figure looming over the race was Alexander Hamilton himself. Hamilton strongly disliked John Adams, and because of this, Hamilton began to secretly coalesce Federalist support behind Charles Cotesworth Pinckney for president. At this time, Hamilton wrote a scathing letter against President John Adams that later fell into the hands of Democratic Republicans. Democratic Republicans later published this letter. This letter severely damaged President John Adams and was said to be a pivotal factor in what happened next. With 276 electoral votes at play, this election was extremely close. However, Alexander Hamilton's letter against President John Adams proved to be a crucial blow to Adams' chances. The final results of the election shocked the entire country. Coming in first place were both Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr of the Federalist Party, with 73 electoral votes. Coming in second place was incumbent President John Adams with 65 electoral votes. Then Charles Cotesworth Pinckney with 64 electoral votes, and finally John Jay with 1 electoral vote. These results led to a tie in which both Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr were now vying to become president. In the scenario of a tied election, the president is voted on by the House of Representatives through state delegations. This meant that the majority Federalist Congress had to vote on the next president. After going through 35 ballots, the election seemed to be in gridlock. That is until Alexander Hamilton once again stepped into the election, changing the course of American history forever. Hamilton believed that in order to avoid another constitutional crisis, the United States would need a strong, uncompromising president who would uphold constitutional values. Despite disagreeing with Thomas Jefferson on virtually every issue, Hamilton believed that Jefferson was in fact a tried and true constitutionalist. Hamilton viewed Burr, on the other hand, as a man of questionable integrity, citing his initial refusal to defend the Constitution. For this reason, Alexander Hamilton officially endorsed Thomas Jefferson, leading to the House of Representatives finally breaking gridlock and electing Thomas Jefferson as the next President of the United States, with Aaron Burr becoming Vice President. The presidential election of 1800 was notable because despite the vicious rhetoric during the election, both the Federalists and President John Adams committed themselves to a peaceful transition of power between political parties. It is also important to address the role of the 3/5 compromise in this election. The 3/5 compromise had stated that enslaved persons would be counted as 3/5 of a person in purposes for determining legislative representation for states. Without the 3/5 compromise, John Adams would have defeated Thomas Jefferson in the Electoral College, while Thomas Jefferson would have still maintained the popular vote. With less than 4% of the population voting in this election, a lot of the country was prohibited from voting, including almost all African Americans, women, and non-landowners. At the same time, only 6 of the 16 states used any form of popular vote for selecting their electors. Thank you for checking out our video. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more additional content. If you have any ideas for a future video topic, please leave a comment and let me know what you would like to see me cover next. I'm really hoping to grow this channel and provide you all with more content in the future, and your support means the world to me. Thanks, everyone.